was just looking before the show. Somebody had sent me pictures, and it showed a comet coming in. And the comet, they actually outlined it, and it was shaped like a cross.
Yeah, I mean, it's known to be a winged globe for sure. As it gets closer to the sun, the wings, the outstretched arms of the Savior on the cross, or the wings on that globe, will become more and more prominent as it gets closer to the sun, because you have it. Again, proximity is the most important factor in electrical interaction between opposite charges and between like charges. So that's why the wings spread out more and more. Incidentally, if you go to the book of Exodus, this is really amazing. In the book of Exodus, God tells Moses that I'm going to send a destroyer over tonight, passing over. That's how the term Passover came about. I'm going to send a destroyer, and he will pass over you and not destroy you, yet he will destroy those in Egypt who fail to take the warning.
You're a little low, John. If you can, I don't know if
you.
There
okay.
You are. There you
Did
are.
you check your volume? Because I seem to be shouting into the phone. I hope you set your volume okay.
Oh yeah, actually I have. I have actually got it turned up a bit because I don't know if you might be moving the phone just away from your mouth a little bit. I don't know, but you sound good now.
Thanks for telling me.
Thank you.
They were told by God. God told Moses to tell your people to take the sacrificial lamb, which is a symbolic representation of the coming Jesus, the sacrifice for sin for all mankind. Take that sacrificial lamb, kill the lamb, take the blood from the lamb, and this is for the ancient Israelites now. This is a Jewish holiday, or not just Jewish, but Israelite holiday. And take the blood from the lamb and stroke it on the doors of your houses, of the Israelites' slaves' houses. Put one stroke of blood across the left side of the door, another stroke of blood across the right side of the door, and another stroke of blood on top of the door. And that symbolizes the wings, the two side wings, and the head of the globe. And when that destroyer passes over, God told Moses, your house will be protected. This destroyer will pass over you without damaging you. And God told Moses that this shall be a holiday or memorial for your people forevermore. Tell this to generation after generation. And that's why we have the Passover every April. Well, anyway, getting back to the science behind it, the U.S. government acknowledged discovering this huge planet. And this was an article in the New York Times. I'm not going to go into it, except maybe to read a few brief passages. But think about this. 31 years ago, there's an article from the New York Times, January 30th, 1983. The title was Clues Get Warm in the Search for Planet X by John Noble Wilford. And I'll just read the first paragraph.
Okay.
Something out there beyond the farthest reaches of the known solar system seems to be tugging at Uranus and Neptune. Some gravitational force keeps perturbing the two giant planets, causing irregularities in their orbits. The force suggests a presence far away and unseen, a large object that may be the long-sought Planet X. So they're saying that it's been sought for a long time. And I'll abbreviate the article by saying that the reason it was sought for a long time was that ever since the early 1800s, even the astronomers then, like 200 years ago, noticed that the outer planets Uranus and Neptune had perturbations in their orbital travel. That is, a little jog or dip or excursion out of their normal orbit that was irregular, and there was no reason why that would happen in terms of the physics of motion, except that some gravitational body was out there, and in that particular place beyond their orbit, whenever that planet went around, made a huge circle around the sun, in its revolution, it would be pulled out of its orbit by the rather close proximity of this huge body. And then it would return, after it passed by this huge body, it would return back to its normal orbital path. So the orbit then would be perturbed or stretched out a little bit at one particular point in irregularity in its circular motion. Am I speaking loud enough? I hope so.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're doing
okay.
fine.
And this is how they knew. Going back 200 years, the 1830s, they noticed this. So that's why the article says this has been long sought Planet X. They didn't see it, but they saw its gravitational effects, and they figured this thing must be huge, must be so great, because, you know, the larger a body, the stronger its gravitational pull. And this object must have been way, way out there, but yet, even though it was a great distance out, like a magnet, you know, like a powerful magnet, you can move it far away from a ball bearing. But if the magnet is strong enough, it'll cause that ball bearing to roll toward the magnet. So if the stronger the magnet, or the larger the gravitational body, the greater its ability to attract another object at a great distance away. So that's what they knew. They knew this thing was huge, and they even began to look for it in the early 1900s, 1910. A famous astronomer named Percival Lowell constructed the Lowell Observatory in Arizona, and just dedicated solely to look for Planet X. And that's how the name Planet X came about. It was given to it by the famous astronomer Percival Lowell in the early 1900s. And then the government, NASA, began looking for it. They had a secret document titled The Search for Planet X. This was in the late 70s.
And is there a way, not to interrupt, but I'm curious, is there a way to get one's hands on that document still today?
I think that's on the internet. I know James McCanney mentioned that NASA has an internal document. Of course, it's supposed to be secret, but somehow it got on the internet. And I have James McCanney on tape for going back 12 years or so, where he mentioned on a radio show that, yeah, the government NASA has an internal document titled The Search for Planet X. And so they know it exists. Don't let them tell you that it doesn't, because they're lying. They've been searching for it themselves secretly. They sent up and this is well known too, I bet the New York Times article, where they sent up the Pioneer 10 and 11 space probes. I've had the article right in front of me, but for the sake of saving time, I mean, these are actual photocopies of the New York Times articles that I'm reading to you. So if anybody wants to see the proof that I'm paraphrasing, it's right. I can send you clear pictures of the actual New York Times article, 1982, 1983. The 1982 New York Times stated that they sent up the Pioneer 10 and 11 space probe. The Pioneer 10 is really the one that they were looking at. And that was designed to go close to where they had calculated this object Planet X was located, close to it, hoping that when it got close enough that this Pioneer 10 space probe would be gravitationally pulled off of its trajectory as it passed the point where they calculated this Planet X was located. If it was pulled off its trajectory, that would prove that this huge gravitational body was there pulling the Pioneer 10 space probe off its trajectory. And sure enough, it did. I cannot find, or I haven't really searched out the proof that it actually was pulled off of its trajectory, but all the researchers tell us that it was, and they were satisfied with it. And in fact, I think now that I realize there is proof in the fact that NASA sent up more space telescopes to further verify what the Pioneer 10 had already verified, that indeed its trajectory had been pulled slightly, deviated slightly by the gravitational pull of Planet X. And the following year, after 1982, 79 was the year. 1979 was the year they sent up the Pioneer 10 space probe Took a few years to get way, way out there beyond Pluto and where Planet X was located and get pulled off of its trajectory. And in 1983, they sent up the infrared astronomical satellite. That's what this New York Times article is talking about. It focuses on the infrared astronomical satellite. In fact, this January 1983 New York Times article that I'm holding in my hand has a picture of the infrared astronomical satellite. It says U.S., as I'm reading here, U.S. and Dutch technicians are preparing the infrared astronomical satellite before its launch last week. This is from United Press International. And last week was the week before the article was written, which was January 30th. So it was launched in January of 1983. Then it went up and it did all of this infrared telescope orbited around the pole, the south pole of planet Earth, way, way up above the clouds where there was no obstacles, no obstruction to its view, and it was infrared specifically because this object, being a brown dwarf, what they believe to be a brown dwarf star, does not emit visible light. It emits only infrared light. It's a slow, smoldering brown dwarf star, a star that not a baby star. It didn't quite get big enough to light up like and ignite like our sun is a huge adult star, but this is a baby star. And those brown dwarf stars are quite common in the universe. This one, they emit only infrared light because they're not large enough to go into nuclear fusion and emit various wavelengths, the entire spectrum of light, just the infrared. So that's what the infrared astronomical satellite was designed to do. And indeed, that infrared satellite did spot, sight, and photograph Planet X. I've got the article in front of me. After the New York Times, the January 1983 New York Times article heralded the launch of the infrared astronomical satellite, 11 months later, 11 months after January 1983, in December 83, the Washington Post front page article heralded the discovery of Planet X, but then they didn't call it Planet X. They just said, "Wow, we found this huge body." And I'll read you the article, the actual article that I photocopied from the microfilm archives at my county library. Front page, Washington Post, December 30th, 1983. Article titled, "Possibly as Large as Jupiter, a Mystery Heavenly Body Discovered," by Thomas O'Toole, Washington Post staff writer. Quote, "A heavenly body, possibly as large as the giant planet Jupiter, and possibly so close to Earth that it would be part of this solar system, has been found in the direction of the constellation Orion by an orbiting telescope aboard the U.S. infrared astronomical satellite." Now here's where they're told by our wonderful domineering National Security Agency, which controls, the NSA controls all of the government agencies, even the CIA they control. Here's where they were told to sort of cover up some of the details because they didn't want to panic the people. They say, "So mysterious is this object that astronomers do not know if it is a planet, a giant comet, a nearby protostar." A protostar would be a star that's beginning to form, that never got hot enough to become a star. They don't know whether it's a distant galaxy so young that it's still in the process of forming its first stars, or a galaxy so shrouded in dust that none of the light cast by its stars ever gets through. See, this is all a bunch of nonsense that they added in there to cover up the fact that if they know what it is, they dedicated the infrared astronomical satellite to finding Planet X, the brown dwarf, which they call the brown dwarf star, in January, and now they're lying about something that they publicly announced to the world in the New York Times 11 months earlier.
And
They must think we're really stupid.
yeah, and I have no doubt that they were looking for it, and I know about these articles that came out in the newspaper about them finding it. Now, has anybody confronted them with these articles and said, "Well, then what the hell is this?" If you don't
Well,
know what we're talking about.
if you ever did, they would never respond. That's guaranteed. But we're bringing truth out. I'm bringing it out. Mark Hazelwood brought it out in his book, Blindsided, about 13 years ago. And of course, Mark did not have the actual photocopies of the articles. He just had transcripts of them. But he said, yeah, they lied about it. And they try to say, oh, we don't know what this thing is. But actually, if the National Security Agency had really been on their toes and alert, they would have said, don't even report it at all. Do not mention this thing at all. Well, it got by them. At that time, they were not that quite alert to it. And the Washington Post put the information out. Why? Because NASA was really pleased. The scientists at NASA were thrilled. This was a great discovery, and they wanted to tell the world about it. Of course, they were just scientists trying to be honest, but they didn't know that there was a power elite controlling them and were
They
lying to
found
the
out
people.
quick.
So they had to obey their ruler, their non-scientific evil rulers. And we know the NSA is evil. We see what they're doing today.
Oh, absolutely,
So,
absolutely, John. Let's take a break. This is a good spot to stop for a minute, take a break, and we'll late night in the Midlands, no spaces. And if you're listening on the Dark Matter Radio Network, again, it's recorded for you, so don't call in. And John, well, we're back, and I am fascinated, and I haven't given it a whole lot of thought. But when you bring up this newspaper article, that it is very real. There was other ones too, wasn't there? Other articles that came out before they
well,
hushed everybody up.
yes, the subject was made taboo and forbidden by the National Security Agency back in 1983 after the New York Times heralded the discovery of this object. But a couple of articles did slip out, and then nothing was said afterward that I can find, perhaps in some other publications, but it's been essentially kept secret for 31 years. Now, there's proof right there. Just think about this. The largest object, and I'm going to tell you how of magnitude of this discovery is the greatest astronomical discovery in the modern history of the world. And to show you how important and paramount this discovery is, I'll just read a little bit more of the landmark Washington Post front page article, December 30th, 1983, which I just began to read, and it goes on to say that, quote, the most fascinating explanation of this mystery body, which is so cold that it casts no light, and that's why they need an infrared telescope, so cold that it casts no light, the explanation of what it is has never been seen by optical telescopes on Earth or in space. Their most, I'm cutting in with my own commentary here, is that explanation is that it is a giant gaseous planet. This is all quotes from the article. A giant gaseous planet as large as Jupiter and as close to Earth as 50 billion miles. While that may seem like a great distance in earthbound terms, it is a stone's throw in cosmological terms. So close, in fact, that it would be the nearest heavenly body to Earth beyond the outermost planet, Pluto. If it is really that close, it would be a part of our solar system, said Dr. James Houck, H-O-U-C-K, of Cornell University Center for Radiophysics. So they're saying this object is so close and that it's actually considered to be a part of our solar system. Now here you have an object. We know that Jupiter is the giant of our solar system by a large degree. And yet this object is a brown dwarf star, which is defined as being brown dwarf stars are larger than Jupiter.
Yeah,
So
and
this
why?
object would have to be, it's so close it would have to be a member of our solar system. That's how important, astronomically important, this object is.
And why
And
so
yet it was
cold?
covered up for 31 years.
Right, and why is it so cold? Some people have speculated that there could be life on this planet, but if it's that cold, how could there
No.
be?
Well, it's like saying there could be life on Jupiter. No way.
Yeah,
See, it's a gas giant. These brown dwarf stars, and Jupiter is almost a brown dwarf star itself. We
yeah,
can learn a lot about Planet X by just studying Jupiter. Jupiter is a gas giant, just like Uranus and Neptune. And that means it's not dense like our Earth is, because a star, as you know, just like our sun, doesn't have the great density that Earth doesn't have the land masses that Earth has, but it's more ethereal, composed of gases like clouds of various gases, just like our sun. And that's why it's impossible for life as we know it to exist there. The temperatures are extremely high. Even though they say it's cold, it's really has its own heat source internally, furnace. And it would destroy. No life could exist because of the atmosphere and because there's nothing to stand on, really.
right. And
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say also that now they've been covering this up for 31 years, and that's where that planet was 31 years ago, I guess. But 31 years have passed, so where is it now?
Well, just imagine this. Now, this is all basic physics, which I used to teach, and anyone can learn it by getting a college physics textbook from their local library. There's a gravitational pull between our sun and objects surrounding our sun, as we know. Now, what is the mass? What is the magnitude of the gravitational pull of our sun? It's tremendous. It's hard to even visualize how great the gravitational pull of our sun is. But I'll tell you what the mass is estimated as: nearly 1/3 of a million Earths. That's the mass of our sun. Not that our sun is as dense as our Earth, but it is so large that its total mass throughout its entire huge volume, its total mass is equal to the mass of 1/3 of a million Earths. So you can imagine with a mass that great as our sun has, the sun would be a tremendous gravitational magnet, so to speak, pulling objects around it. And the reason it doesn't pull Mercury into it, Mercury doesn't crash into the sun, the reason that Venus doesn't crash into the sun, and the reason Earth and all the other planets do not crash into the sun, is that there's a counterbalancing force, a centrifugal, the word fugal being derived from the word fugitive or fleeing from the center force, centrifugal force, which we experience that centrifugal force when we make a left turn in our cars. We tend to slide to the right, or when we make a right turn, we tend to slide to the left. Well, that's the centrifugal force that counteracts the centripetal or center-seeking force, center-pulling force that the sun exerts on the planet. So when those two forces, the centripetal force on the orbiting planet is counterbalanced by the centrifugal force of that orbiting planet, then the planet remains at a fixed distance orbiting the sun. Otherwise, it will get pulled in. But take an object that happens to be passing by or being pulled in by the sun. It's not on a circular orbit. It's on maybe an elliptical orbit, which is pretty much approximates a straight line in some sections because it's such a long stretched elliptical orbit. Now it cannot revolve around the sun. Therefore, it must come zooming in toward the sun, and that's where the great danger is. It's like if you were to have runners on a track, Olympic runners, and you had a series of concentric tracks, one track within another, where all the runners are on their own track and they are safely passing one another without colliding into one another, because each one has a separate orbital track, just like our planets have their separate orbital paths. However, imagine an intruder, a bystander, who would come running through the tracks, racing toward the center of those tracks. He could be a great danger to the other runners, colliding with them, knocking them over. Well, in this case, the planets are so far apart that it's unlikely that there will be a collision. However, as this object passes by, even though it doesn't hit Earth, its gravitational and magnetic forces are so strong that those gravitational magnetic forces pull and massage the crustal skin of planet Earth on which we live, and pull and massage the underlying flesh, so to speak, of planet Earth, which is the magma mantle beneath the Earth. And that's why the Earth becomes deformed and mountains have been formed. We can see the evidence quite clearly in mountain building that has occurred throughout the ages as a result of this passing object coming in.
And I'm a little curious here. Like you had mentioned that Jupiter is really close to being a brown dwarf star. So if that's the case, I mean, what determines what a moon is and what's not? Because now Jupiter has how many moons orbiting around of it? I mean, could any of those actually be planets?
Yes, that's possible. I mean, it is. I'm not much. I haven't studied that so quite deeply enough, and even the scientists, astronomers, astrophysicists don't know if there's some form of life on Jupiter's moons, Ganymede, Io, Callisto, and Titan, is it, or Tycho? One of those moons could have life on it because they could be solid objects like Earth. They could be gaining heat energy and some form of minimal light energy from Jupiter, which would be their sun. And it's possible. I don't know for sure, but it's an interesting consideration. Anytime you have a brown dwarf star, or better yet, an adult star with the planets orbiting around it, there's a possibility of life on those planets.
Yeah, I mean, because they lie to us about so much, and that's why when people say, oh, no, there's definitely not life here or there, I say, well, if we're going to agree that we've been lied to, we have to also agree that we could have been lied to about everything. So who's to say that there's not planets orbiting Jupiter or something like that? And, I mean, how would we know? We're not up there.
Right. Well, there are planets orbiting Jupiter, and I think they're pretty curious to know if there's life. They look for water. That's the main indication of life. But the main cover-up would be for the purpose of preventing the public from losing their obedience and their control by the power elite. That's the reason they want to cover up everything.
Right, and what I guess I'm getting at with the whole Jupiter thing is then this brown dwarf star, Planet X, then this brown dwarf star could very well have planets around it. It most likely does. So I wonder, could we see we can't see the dwarf star itself because it's too cold or what have you. It's dark. But what about, will light reflect off any of the planets that might be orbiting around this thing, and maybe we could see those?
It's engulfed. Well, I agree. There are said to be planets orbiting around it, and it is logical that it would have planets because it's like a huge vacuum cleaner as it travels through deep space, gravitationally pulling in smaller planets and comets. So it's really engulfed by huge, by many, many celestial objects, and that are all gravitationally captured by this huge Planet X. And in fact, James McCann had announced several years ago that he got indications from his contacts in the military and professional astronomers down in Project Wormwood down in Australia that a mini, what he quoted as he was quoting these contacts as saying that a mini solar system is moving into our solar system. And that would make sense. You have a solar system would be a star or a star-like object with objects orbiting around it. So yeah, I'm quite sure that it has many objects around it.
Yeah, and I'm wondering now, would it be possible at all to be able to see something like this at night? And I ask because I have noticed, I've talked about this a few times now, I've noticed what I can only call a star up in my night sky. And when I look closely at it, it's usually around between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning, I can see what looks like planetoid objects around this thing. Now, I don't know what it is. It might be something normal. I'm no professional, but I'm curious, could it be possible to see it at night, even on the East Coast?
So you would need an infrared.
Okay.
Right now, it's pretty much dark. Huge as it is, it's not emitting hardly any or zero visible light, only infrared, as the article states, because it's a smoldering brown dwarf star, and those are not big enough to go into nuclear fusion to generate visible light. So you would not see it now. Later on, we'll see it when it gets closer to the sun, because now it begins to light up as it gets closer to the sun, because of the electrical interaction between planet X and the sun. And it starts to glow red. And that's what, these ancient historians wrote about. They said they saw this red, fiery, glowing, coiling, spoiled, undulating tail serpent in the sky. So you know from ancient accounts that this thing is going to start lighting up when it gets closer. And its companion bodies, its orbiting comets, will also light up. That's the key to visual light emission from these objects is closer proximity to the sun. That's when they start lighting up.
And now,
so right now you can't see it. It's probably, I suspect that it's probably way out near Saturn someplace, making a big U-turn. It has to make a huge U-turn around deep in the outer solar system.
Well, it's funny you said Saturn, John. I normally don't interrupt like this, but I'm getting all excited over here because you mentioned Saturn, and I had just read an article where they were talking about, I guess, the government, some fashion of the government, and NASA was putting together a plan to possibly shoot some kind of nukes at Saturn to try to ignite it.
Yeah, I've heard about that. That was a number of years ago. Right, they had a nuclear power source, and they were going to crash this thing into Saturn
and try to ignite it.
It's strange, but there is a lot of satanic ritual involved in NASA
and Saturn. Yeah,
I mean, Saturn is an ancient name for Satan.
Yeah,
and they worship, and these crazy world rulers still worship Satan. Obviously, that's how they get their power. And this would be a sacrifice to Satan. I mean, in their demented agenda, that's what they might be doing. It sounds kind of weird, but if you look at NASA's activities, there have been rituals, satanic rituals performed in space, from what I understand. Tex Mars documented some of it, and I think there are other people that documented it too. So, I don't know what's going on there, but I believe that Planet X is out there because it has to make a U-turn. You see, if you look at basic physics, we know that it makes an elliptical orbit, and it goes around the sun and comes back again and over the top of the sun and then through the solar system, where it causes great gravitational and magnetic havoc with the planets, all the planets. And then it's slingshotted back by the centrifugal, by the pulling force, the centripetal slingshot force of the sun when it makes that U-turn. And the sun shoots it back through the solar system, back out into deep space, where it travels for centuries, actually about 18 centuries. And during that 18th century trip, it loops around another sun, our solar system's twin sun, a dead sun, billions and billions of miles out there, that has been identified by NASA, not by me, not by conjecture, but by NASA, in a 1987 encyclopedia, a New Science and Invention Encyclopedia, the 1987 edition. You can see the diagram of our sun's twin sun given to them by NASA. Yeah. And it just sounds strange that we would have a twin sun, but astronomers and astrophysicists will tell you that most solar systems that they have found out about do have a twin sun. They're binary. It's called binary,
right.
Two.
So it makes sense that we
twin suns is like two tennis players on a tennis court. Our sun would be representing the tennis player on the near court. Our sun's distant dead sun would represent the tennis player on the far court. And Planet X would represent the tennis ball. Or the tennis ball would represent Planet X, being batted back and forth by these two suns.
Mm-hmm. So
and that's what we have. And we found it to be a very regular, consistent time interval of 36 and a half centuries. So it takes 36 and a half centuries for this Planet X, this tennis ball, to go from one tennis player back to the other, to loop from one sun back to the other sun. 36 and a half centuries. It's like clockwork. In fact, you could call it a celestial pendulum. As you know, the pendulum on a grandfather's clock swings at a uniform, consistent time interval of so many seconds. It takes so many seconds for that pendulum on the grandfather's clock to make one complete cyclical swing.
So now
you can predict that time, just like you can predict 36 and a half centuries for this celestial pendulum to come into our solar system, to damage Earth, destroy almost all life on Earth, to give planet Earth a new facelift, building new mountains, bringing down other mountains, sinking land masses, bringing up new land masses from the depths of the sea, and you have a whole new Earth created.
Right. Now, if it was anywhere near Saturn, say right now, then would we be able to see an unusual type of strong pull on Saturn, where you'll see, sometimes you can look at these objects in the sky and you know something's nearby because you'll see them wobbling, where gravity's pulling on them and pushing on them.
Yes, absolutely, yes. You could see storms. We've seen storms on Saturn, and possibly we've seen pole shifts, perhaps magnetic pole shifts, maybe even geographic pole shifts on the outer planets. Neptune, I believe, had a pole shift. Like the eye. Neptune has I believe, an eye like Jupiter has an eye. That eye is actually a whirlpool, some kind of a swirling windstorm. And when they saw that Neptune a number of years ago, there was they call it a wizard's eye, I think. And that eye on Neptune actually vertically shifted, indicating that there was some kind of a pole shift on Neptune.
Well, and the eye disappeared on Jupiter at one point too, didn't it?
That's right. Yeah. That's such a key clue right there. There's no reason why the eye on Jupiter would disappear. I'm glad you brought that up. I had forgotten about that. That tells me that, this object, when it comes in, you might say, well, wait a minute, it's Saturn, it hasn't gotten to Jupiter yet. But that's not the case. You have to. It has actually passed Jupiter before it got to Saturn.
Yeah.
And the way you could visualize it is this. You have visualize a circular table. This is a modern day microcosmic analogy of how you could visualize this whole situation, which is quite complex. Visualize a circular table in a restaurant. And on the table, the center of the table is a lamp that represents the sun. The circular table, which we'll say we can make it revolve, okay? That revolving circular table represents the solar system's ecliptic, which is that invisible disk in space on which all the planets revolve around the sun. And now visualize from the center lamp on this slowly revolving table, a little bit out away from the center lamp, you might place something that's quite visual, easy to remember, like maybe a cranberry. That cranberry might represent planet Mercury. A little further out, away further from the center lamp, would be another small object, maybe a blueberry, which would represent planet Venus. And further out, you might place a walnut, which might represent planet Earth, and so on. Jupiter, farther out, would be perhaps represented by a grapefruit.
And John, somebody just made a good point in the chat too, that Saturn actually lost one of its stripes at one point, didn't it?
That's right. These are major clues. These are anomalies that are extraordinary. For Jupiter to lose its eye, its whirlpool, and the band on Jupiter to disappear. We saw activity on Jupiter. We saw comets crashing into Jupiter around 2009. Yeah, about 5 years ago. And they were photographed, of course, by amateurs, because NASA would never release its own photographs. We had to rely on amateur astronomers to show us a comet crashing into the southern hemisphere of Jupiter in July of 2009. Then another comet that year or the next year crashed into Jupiter, southern hemisphere again. That told me that planet X was coming beneath Jupiter. And if you go back to that table that I was, a circular, slowly revolving circular table that I was describing, and with the planets all, laid out on the table, rotating, and the sun, the lamp in the center, imagine now that planet X is going to be represented by someone lying on the floor, off to the side of the table, not underneath the table, but way off to the side. And as someone lying on the floor, let's say he uses a slingshot to shoot a ball bearing up toward the underside of the table. And let's say that that ball bearing is able to penetrate the underside of the table and come up through the top of the table. That's the trajectory of planet X. It's coming from the south, according to Dr. Robert S. Harrington, who is mentioned in this landmark New York Times article. Dr. Harrington contributed to that article in the New York Times. And Dr. Harrington says he believes that it's probably a brown dwarf star. And that's what I'm reading from the article. Dr. Robert S. Harrington, chief astronomer of the United States Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., believes it is a brown dwarf star exerting this tremendous gravitational force.
Now, was he the one that was just recently killed, or not recently, but was killed?
Yeah, that's right. He was. It was there's quite a lot of circumstantial evidence that he was murdered because he was his lifelong quest was to find planet X. And he was the lead man in this search, and he indeed dispatched telescopes. He may have gone personally himself, but he stated in his documents before his death that he was dispatching an 8-inch telescope with a specially ground lens made by some of his NASA scientists and technicians that would be capable of viewing planet X. Now, an 8-inch telescope is kind of it's not very large at all. So Dr. Harrington evidently expected this object to be big enough to see with that rather small 8-inch telescope. Dr. Harrington dispatched the 8-inch telescope to Black Birch Observatory in New Zealand, because you have to go close to the South Pole in order to view this thing, because it's coming in from below the planets, below the feet of planet Earth, which would be the Antarctica. And so you have to go down close to the South Pole to see it. And that's why he dispatched the telescope to Black Birch Observatory in New Zealand. The photographs were taken consecutive nights with a fixed telescope. And when you see one object out of millions of objects in the sky, one object is moving and all the other millions of objects are stationary in the two photographs. You take two photographs and you can't hardly distinguish one from the other. It must have been an infrared telescope. But you can hardly distinguish the two photographic plates and until you overlay one plate on the other. One photograph taken one night, another photograph taken the other night, and they're transparent lenses, transparencies that can be viewed when you look through them. You shine light through the side of the two superimposed or overlaid photographic plates. And then what Clyde Tombaugh, the brilliant astronomer who discovered Pluto in the 1930s, Clyde Tombaugh devised a blink comparator, which was a way of alternately flashing the light, illuminating one plate, and then flashing the light, illuminating the other plate, alternately back and forth, rapidly enough that when you look at it, the human eye can actually distinguish any change in position between any one of the millions of objects on the two plates. All the other stars would appear stationary because they're so far away, they're not moving at all. They're stars anyway. And so they're stationary, but if there's an object that's moving, like Planet X, coming in toward us, you're going to see a change in the position of that one out of a million different objects in the sky by using Clyde Tombaugh's blink comparator method. And that's what Dr. Harrington did. And he was going to bring his discovery back. He had to put out a memo, which we have on the internet, stating that when those plates are returned from New Zealand, I'm going to analyze them, and I'm going to reveal to the world what the findings were. Well, Dr. Harrington never lived to do that. He died of cancer within a matter of a couple of weeks. And what happened to the plates? There's sort of evidence right there that he was murdered. The plates were never revealed. They never said, hey, Dr. Harrington died, but don't worry, we've taken his discovery and we're going to reveal it to the world. No, not a word was said about it. Those plates were obviously confiscated and secured somewhere so that no one would ever know what happened.
Thank you for listening to the first hour of Late Night in the Midlands. To finish listening to this episode, go to lnmradionetwork.com and become a subscriber. Becoming a subscriber is easy. There is a link on every page to take you to the subscription page. The cost is low, and you would be supporting Late Night in the Midlands and all of our efforts to bring you the truth. Again, go to lnmradionetwork.com, click on the subscribe button, and you can finish listening to this episode as well as all of the other shows that are in our archives.
Wilford, and I'll just read the first paragraph.
Okay.
Something out there beyond the farthest reaches of the known solar system seems to be tugging at Uranus and Neptune. Some gravitational force keeps perturbing the two giant planets, causing irregularities in their orbits. The force suggests a presence far away and unseen, a large object that may be the long-sought Planet X. So they're saying that it's been sought for a long time. And I'll abbreviate the article by saying that the reason it was sought for a long time was that ever since the early 1800s, even the astronomers then, like 200 years ago, noticed that the outer planets Uranus and Neptune had perturbations in their orbital travel. That is, a little jog or dip or excursion out of their normal orbit that was irregular, and there was no reason why that would happen in terms of the physics of motion, except that some gravitational body was out there, and in that particular place beyond their orbit, whenever that planet went around, made a huge circle around the sun in its revolution, it would be pulled out of its orbit by the rather close proximity of this huge body. And then it would return, after it passed by this huge body, it would return back to its normal orbital path. So the orbit then would be perturbed or stretched out a little bit at one particular point in irregular. I think that's on the internet. I know James McCanney mentioned that NASA has an internal document. Of course, it's supposed to be secret, but somehow it got on the internet. And I have James McCanney on tape going back 12 years or so, where he mentioned on a radio show that, yeah, the government NASA has an internal document titled The Search for Planet X. And so they know it exists. Don't let them tell you that it doesn't, because they're lying. They've been searching for it themselves secretly. They sent up and this is well known too, I bet the New York Times article, where they sent up the Pioneer 10 and 11 space probes. I've had the article right in front of me, but for the sake of saving time, I mean, these are actual photocopies of the New York Times articles that I'm reading to you. So if anybody wants to see the proof that I'm paraphrasing, it's right. I can send you clear pictures of the actual New York Times article, 1982, 1983. The 1982 New York Times stated that they sent up the Pioneer 10 and 11 space probe. The Pioneer 10 is really the one that they were looking at. And that was designed to go close to where they had calculated this object Planet X was located, close to it, hoping that when it got close enough that this Pioneer 10 space probe would be gravitationally pulled off of its trajectory as it passed the point where they calculated this Planet X was located. If it was pulled off its trajectory, that would prove that this huge gravitational body was there pulling the Pioneer 10 space probe off its trajectory. And sure enough, they were told by God. God told Moses to tell your people to take the sacrificial lamb, which is a symbolic representation of the coming Jesus, the sacrifice for sin for all mankind. Take that sacrificial lamb, kill the lamb, take the blood from the lamb, and this is for the ancient Israelites now. This is a Jewish holiday, or not just Jewish, but Israelite holiday. And take the blood from the lamb and stroke it on the doors of your houses, of the Israelites' slaves' houses. Put one stroke of blood across the left side of the door, another stroke of blood across the right side of the door, and another stroke of blood on top of the door. And that symbolizes the wings, the two side wings, and the head of the globe. And when that destroyer passes over, God told Moses, your house will be protected. This destroyer will pass over you without damaging you. And God told Moses that this shall be a holiday or memorial for your people forevermore. Tell this to generation after generation. And that's why we have the Passover every April. Well, anyway, getting back to the science behind it, the U.S. government acknowledged discovering this huge planet, and this was an article in the New York Times. I'm not going to go into it, except maybe to read a few brief passages. But think about this. 31 years ago, there's an article from the New York Times, January 30th, 1983. The title was Clues Get Warm in the Search for Planet X by John Noble.
I was just looking before the show. Somebody had sent me pictures, and it showed a comet coming in. And the comet, they actually outlined it, and it was shaped like a cross.
Yeah, I mean, it's known to be a winged globe for sure. As it gets closer to the sun, the wings, the outstretched arms of the Savior on the cross, or the wings on that globe, will become more and more prominent as it gets closer to the sun, because you have it. Again, proximity is the most important factor in electrical interaction between opposite charges and between like charges. So that's why the wings spread out more and more. Incidentally, if you go to the book of Exodus, this is really amazing. In the book of Exodus, God tells Moses that I'm going to send a destroyer over tonight, passing over. That's how the term Passover came about. I'm going to send a destroyer, and he will pass over you and not destroy you, yet he will destroy those in Egypt who fail to take the warning.
You're a little low, John. If you can, I don't know if you. There
okay.
You are. There you
Did
are.
you check your volume? Because I seem to be shouting into the phone. I hope you set your volume okay.
Oh yeah, actually I have. I have actually got it turned up a bit because I don't know if you might be moving the phone just away from your mouth a little bit. I don't know, but you sound good now.
Thanks for telling me.
Thank you.
Basilarity in its circular motion. Am I speaking loud enough? I hope so.
Oh yeah, you're doing
okay.
fine.
And this is how they knew, going back 200 years, the 1830s, they noticed this. So that's why the article says this has been long sought Planet X. They didn't see it, but they saw its gravitational effects, and they figured this thing must be huge, must be so great, because the larger a body, the stronger its gravitational pull. And this object must have been way, way out there, but yet, even though it was a great distance out, like a magnet, like a powerful magnet, you can move it far away from a ball bearing. But if the magnet is strong enough, it'll cause that ball bearing to roll toward the magnet. So if the stronger the magnet, or the larger the gravitational body, the greater its ability to attract another object at a great distance away. So that's what they knew. They knew this thing was huge, and they even began to look for it in the early 1900s, 1910. A famous astronomer named Percival Lowell constructed the Lowell Observatory in Arizona, and just dedicated solely to look for Planet X. And that's how the name Planet X came about. It was given to it by the famous astronomer Percival Lowell in the early 1900s. And then the government, NASA, began looking for it. They had a secret document titled The Search for Planet X. This was in the late 70s.
And is there a way, not to interrupt, but I'm curious, is there a way to get one's hands on that document still today?